Nigeria's debt to hit 38.68 trillion naira by December 2021. Insecurity, major barrier to AfCFTA, says ECOWAS. And federal government acquired software to monitor revenue remittances by MDAs. And today on the program, a look at the various revenue sources for government amid funding gaps. The program is Business Express, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. And I am Muplang Dakok. It's so good to have you tuned to Business Express on the NTA. Nigeria's external and domestic debts may hit 38.68 trillion naira by December 2021. Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning Zainab Ahmed stated this at the Budget Defense session organized by the Senate Committee on Local and Foreign Debt at the National Assembly. The minister noted that total public debt stock comprising the external and domestic debts of the federal and state governments and the Federal Capital Territory stood at 31.01 trillion naira as at June 30, 2020. She says based on existing approvals, the debt is expected to rise to 32.51 trillion naira by December 31, 2020 and 38.68 trillion naira by December 31, 2021. The 2021 appropriation bill has a provision of 3.1 trillion naira for debt service, and domestic debt service has a provision of 2.1 billion naira, while external debt service has a provision of 940.89 billion naira. The minister added that the 2021 appropriation bill provided for new borrowing of 4.2 billion naira, which was broken down equally between domestic borrowing and external borrowing. She blamed the debts on abandoned road projects across the 6 geopolitical zones. The economic outlook for Nigeria in 2021 is positive despite the current recession, the second in the last 4 years. Minister of Finance Zainab Ahmed said this during a budget defense session with the House of Representatives Committee on Finance. National Assembly correspondent Lami Ali reports.
As at the third quarter of 2020, said the Minister of Finance, revenue generation has hit 70% despite the coronavirus pandemic, which caused a slowdown in all sectors. She added that the 2021 budget will expectedly help bring the country out of recession.
Considering the constraints that the country is going through in terms of economic slowdown, we'll say that the revenue performance is still a reasonably good one compared to what we were expecting.
Our role of oversight will be more effective if we are able to have a real-time revenue monitoring system in place rather than the present approach of our post-mortem monitoring.
The Minister of Agriculture, Sabon Nono, during an engagement with the House Committee on Agricultural Services, gave a rundown of strategies outlined towards research-driven agricultural activities for food security and employment generation.
Our colleges are also encouraged to improve their student intake. The ARCN has also been given approval to commence the process of establishing an agricultural radio station, which is expected to contribute to enhance the delivery of agricultural information to farmers.
The country has witnessed serious hardship due to the impact of COVID-19, thereby depleting our national food reserve. We must therefore ensure that production is accelerated.
The issue of inadequate funding to foreign missions again came up when the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Geoffrey Onyema, appeared before the House Committee on Foreign Affairs.
Most of our missions have not been able to meet a number of core obligations. Health insurance, for instance, education supplement, electricity and other utilities, rent, and travel and staff entitlements.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, alongside its missions abroad, remain the window and mirror through which the global community sees our country, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, Chairman House Committee on National Planning and Economic Development, Representative Olododo Cook, says the committee is not satisfied with the presentation of the Director General, Nigeria Institute of Social and Economic Research, as guidelines were not adhered to.
Vice President Yemi Akinwunmi will this Thursday oversee the signing of agreements to conclude the sale of Afam power plants to the tune of 105 billion naira, a transaction viewed as a needed support for the revenue challenge facing the country. Director General of the Bureau for Public Enterprises, Alex Oko, who made the disclosure in Abuja, says it was timely, coming from fresh concerns over a new wave of COVID-19 infections, coupled with disruptions to the Nigerian economy from recent protests and a looming recession.
To help generate revenues to support the fiscal plan for the year. And incidentally, we are going to be doing the signing ceremony for the sale of Afam power plant to the preferred bidder. That alone will fetch the federal government a total sum of 105 billion naira. So we didn't slow down our activities at all. Business is continuing as usual for us. We'll do the signing ceremony at the office of His Excellency the Vice President, and then they go ahead 15 days after to pay the 25% of that 105 billion naira. And
Nigeria's pharmaceutical industry, comprising of 101 registered members with investment worth 300 billion naira, on Tuesday urged the Central Bank of Nigeria to review the moratorium for the 100 billion naira healthcare intervention fund to 2 years from 1 year that was stated in the guideline for assessing the facility. In its communique on 25th March, the CBN announced the setting up of a 100 billion naira credit support fund targeted at the healthcare sector to provide working capital loans as well as term loans to healthcare players to support expansion activities, research and similar activities. The loans would come at interest rates of 5% per annum until 28th of February 2021 and climb to 9% per annum for the rest of the loan duration. President Pharmaceutical Society of Nigeria, Sam Oha Bunwa, asked the CBN to make a special allocation for all those who are beneficiaries of the facility to be given foreign exchange to import what is needed to boost their capacity. He asked for elongation of the moratorium to 2 years and maybe extend the repayment further down the line. He said so far 15 operators have accessed the fund and 15 applications are awaiting approval by the Apex Bank. In another development, the Accountant General of the Federation, Ahmed Idris, has disclosed that the federal government will soon acquire a software to monitor revenue remittances by various ministries, departments and agencies in the country. Idris, who stated this Tuesday at the resumed budget defense session at the National Assembly, said his office is working through the Department of Revenue and Investment to have a software linked to all revenue-generating agencies to monitor leakages. Chairman of the committee, James Owaleke, said is assuring the general public that lawmakers will ensure the money for the project is budgeted. We have Dr. Tefa Abraham, who joins us to discuss possible revenue streams open to government for the development of critical infrastructure amid funding challenges. You're welcome, Dr. Tefa, to Business Express.
Thank you, Moplan. Good to see you again.
Okay, so the budget, the 2021 budget is being prepared amidst, you know, we have domestic challenges and then the global challenges, and now we have the aftermath of the NSAS protests to deal with. What do you think are some of the ways that government can raise revenue to meet this budget?
Like you rightly said, thank you again for this opportunity. The 2020-2021 proposed total expenditure is 13.08 trillion. That creates, with an expected revenue of 7.88 trillion, creating a deficit gap of about 5.1 trillion. The way the government projected it is that that deficit will be funded using borrowing, domestic and external, and that accounts for 82% or thereabout of the borrowing. And then for sale of assets and privatization, then multilateral and bilateral borrowing, which accounts for like 13% and 3% respectively. In terms of the revenue, basically the challenge 2021 budget has is revenue, as the minister said, rightly said. Now, some of the ways to be able to overcome that revenue challenge, there's currently on ground the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative. And then there's also the Presidential Committee that's monitoring revenue. So the idea is to implement the strategies that have been itemized in the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative, which includes passage of the PIB, ensuring efficient monitoring of revenue generating agencies, and then also the introduction of tax expenditure. But one thing that is critical to all these initiatives contained in the Strategic Revenue and Growth Revenue Initiative and the Presidential Committee, one thing that is important is to ensure that they are backed up by legislative framework to ensure adherence to all the MDAs concerned and all the players in the private and public sector space to ensure compliance to revenue generating initiatives of the federal government.
Okay, we'll go back again to what you talked about, talking about what the legislature has to do. But still talking about revenues and how to raise them. The federal government is saying that about 60 government-owned agencies are expected to raise revenue for the proposed budget. Do you see that bringing so much to the table?
There's certainly a window for MDAs to belt up to contribute to government revenue generating effort. I'll tell you what some MDAs do. Okay. Before MDAs, when they award contracts through their award of tenders and things like that, MDAs also have some capital project implementing equipment, if I may, that contractors rent from them but pay for it. Okay. These are some initiatives that some MDAs, especially MDAs in science and technology space, they do that a lot. So the idea there is that, don't forget that in 2015, when President Muhammadu Buhari's administration came on board, the efficiency unit was introduced for every MDA. That efficiency unit is meant to cut down expenditure. So agencies that are not contributing to the revenue purse should trim down their expenditure by actually sticking to the zero-based budgeting template rather than just filling in line expenditure year in, year out. It's important to do two things: to trim down on expenditure, especially for MDAs, and then to ensure that for MDAs that are non-revenue generating, and then for MDAs that are revenue generating, to find a way to monitor the revenue they generate and to ensure that everything is actually remitted to the Treasury's single account.
You talked about remittances, but some of these agencies do not remit what they should be remitting to the federal government. What can be done to, make them come out of their shelves to, by force, kind of remit to?
It will be important to digitalize the revenue monitoring space. Okay. This whole idea of digital economy cannot drive other sectors if we allow it to exist in isolation. Every MDA must be tied to the digital economy space. Revenue generating and monitoring must be real time. The way we all carry out budget performance analysis, if you check all of us, all the reports, you will see 2020 revenue performance as at 2020, as at August, it's hardly as at today. So this monitoring revenue using real time equipment is really important. And again, also ensuring that taxes, basically Nigeria, the effort so far when we talk of tax reform is either amending the laws, harmonizing the laws, creating an omnibus tax law, amending laws to block leakages and to avoid multiple taxation, which is good. But tax in actual implementation is ICT driven. until we tie the tax collection and monitoring process to the digital space so that the country will know what is being generated real time. If we don't do that, there will continue to be leakages. So what's important, again, is to ensure that we block every avenue to tighten the space to ensure that there's transparency in revenue collection and mobilization.
Okay. You talked about tax helping out in generating revenue. Let's talk about the finance bill. Do you think that the provisions in the finance bill will be able to, for instance, part of the provision is to show up value-added tax, among others. Do you think the finance bill, is going to help do that?
The fundamentals of the macroeconomic fundamentals of Nigeria, as at when the finance bill 2020 was presented as a bill 2019, the fundamentals of the Nigerian economy has changed. Okay. So what's important now is to amend the 2020 Financial Act for 2021 to ensure that it becomes sensitive to the changes that have occurred in the Nigerian economy. Already, businesses, the capacity to generate tax revenue from businesses has already been narrowed. Lockdown, multiple protests, destruction of small-scale businesses and things like that. So there's need to amend that Tax Finance Act so that we'll consider things like extending moratorium for businesses and public sector workers and people like that. And by the way, this moratorium business just means delaying or suspending further the need to ask people who are indebted to start paying. The idea is this: for countries or for people, for businesses whose capacity to generate money is already shrinking and they are indebted, how about extending, giving them some holidays to take a rest from repaying debt so that they can at least get back to business and begin to swing in? And then secondly, it's also be important to ensure this time around effective implementation of social investment program, not onto the level of COVID-19 and all that, but because of the fundamentals that have happened, changes that have happened in the Nigerian economy through electricity tariff, through subsidy fuel price and things like that. Bottom line, as we are doing these things, it's important to do something so that the people will see that the government is actually for the people, by the people and of the people. All right.
Since government is concerned right now about revenue, how to generate revenue, many people from a particular school of thought think that this is a time to cut down on government spending. Are you in that school of thought?
Already, the share of recurrent expenditure in Nigeria's budget is always the issue. Capital budget right now is about 29% of the total 13 trillion. Debt service on its own is about 26 or 27%. So if you try to sink in capital expenditure and debt service, it looks as though that there's no capital expenditure per se. What the budget is currently doing is financing recurrent expenses. And if you look at in terms of the sources of revenue to the government, the highest share of revenue to the federal government is still the allocation it gets from federation account. If all federal government internally generated revenue, which is independent revenue, is still small. And so long as federal government share of federation account is still high, you are going to keep getting this clamoring for restructuring through federalism and things like that. Federal government have to innovate to ensure that it boosts its own independent capacity to generate revenue. And to do that, reforms around government-owned enterprises is extremely crucial. This whole idea of basing repayment of debt based on debt to GDP ratio should be forgotten. The focus should be on debt to revenue, and to ensure that revenue generating agencies are monitored. They shouldn't be allowed to just remit what they want, if I may, to the federal government. There should be a strict way of monitoring and ensuring that what they earn actually goes back to the purse.
Okay. I told you I was going to get back to where you talked about the legislators. So what do you think is very critical for the legislators to do at this point in time for us to be able to, get to the promised land in terms of the 2021 appropriation?
Thank you very much, Moplank. For the legislators, it's important to map what the federal government is doing as an institution and what the federal government is doing through the presidency. And what the federal government is doing as an institution is the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative. That's where you have PIB regulating government-owned enterprises and things like that. Okay. Under the Presidential Panel Monitoring Revenue Committee, what they are doing include things like tax expenditure. The legislature, both houses, Rep and Senate, will need to study these programs and see where they need to provide legislative framework for each of these programs. Don't forget, anything under the presidency it's not sustainable. What I mean, it cannot go from one administration to the next. So then the legislature needs to quickly take a look at that and provide a legislative framework to ensure that the revenue collecting activities that will happen through this initiative and the committee under the presidency will not just go unchecked or unmonitored. Then secondly, there's also the Nigeria Economic Sustainability Plan, which has a lot of scenario analysis about how much government will inject into the economy to boost the economy towards a sustainable 2021. The National Assembly will also need to take a second look at those documents to see where they can provide legislative framework to ensure adherence to those initiatives.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Dr. Tefa Abraham.
Always
so
a pleasure.
About
Always a pleasure.
I've been speaking to Doctor of Economics, Dr. Tefa Abraham, on funding the 2021 budget. Moving on, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has decried that the efforts of the regional bloc to harness the potentials of the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, AFCFTA, is being threatened by the ravaging impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and security challenges that have bedeviled the region, especially as it concerns growing companies and startup businesses. These were the major concerns of members of the ECOWAS Parliament who converged on Cotonou, Benin Republic for a meeting of the Bureau of the Parliament and a delocalized meeting of the Joint Committees on Administration, Finance and Budget, Macroeconomic Policies and Economic Research, Public Accounts, Trade, Customs and Free Movement.
What is at stake is the dignity and well-being of African farmers, workers and entrepreneurs, particularly women and youths. The promise of the free trade is prosperity for all Africans, particularly West Africans, because it provides a prospect for the production of value-added goods and services, increase in income and better living conditions for our citizens.
So the Parliament thought that it was important that we have this meeting so that the Parliament get to know how the implementation is and how West Africa can take advantage of the opportunity to boost trade and free trade across the region. As you may know, Ghana currently hosts the headquarters of the African Continental Free Trade Area, so it's a boost for the region. And so the Honorable Speaker thought that it is very appropriate that the Parliament gets to know exactly what's going on with the free trade area and what role Parliament can play in enhancing the effectiveness and efficiency of the free trade area.
And on the stock market, stocks advanced marginally midweek in the Nigerian bourse, sustaining gains as bargain hunting pushes value upward. The NSE All-Share Index inched upward by 0.3% to close the session at 30,741.88 points, with market capitalization ending the session at 16.068 trillion naira. 286 million shares were traded Wednesday, valued at 3.094 billion naira in 2,889 deals. Access Bank dominated volume with more than 145 million shares being traded in the course of the day. It was trailed by very distant Zenith Bank and UBA. And on the global scene, Hong Kong listed shares of Alibaba tanked in Wednesday as the world awaits outcome of U.S. presidential election. Here's Bosede Abel with a summary of global stock markets.
The ongoing United States election is one major factor affecting the global markets as investors are attuned to the outcome. Dow Jones Industrial Average Futures alternated between gains and losses on Wednesday as the results of the presidential contest so far failed to yield a clear winner on election night. Dow Jones Futures traded 114 points lower. Earlier in the session, those contracts were up sharply. S&P 500 futures gained 0.1% and Nasdaq 100 futures popped 1.8%. European stocks advanced in early trading Wednesday, 4th November, as investors around the world keep watch on the result of the U.S. election. In Asia, Hong Kong listed shares of Alibaba tanked on Wednesday after the anticipated initial public offering of affiliates and group was suspended amid regulatory concerns. Meanwhile, stocks in other major Asia-Pacific markets were higher on Wednesday trading. The Shanghai Composite up 0.19% to 3,277.44. Nikkei rose 1.72% to close at 23,695.23, while the Hang Seng Index depreciated by 0.21%. Africa's stocks are mostly positive, with Namibia's overall index, South Africa's JSE Africa Top 40, and Tunisia's Tunidex posting gains. Boss the Able Business Express.
And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of Business Express. Be sure you can get this and other previous episodes on YouTube. And make sure you join us again tomorrow by 9:30 a.m. Before then, I am Muplang Dakok.